Hello and welcome, brothers and sisters of the multiverse, to Let's Think This Through. Today I want to talk about what psychology misses. Psychology nowadays is a whole different animal than it was 100 years ago, 50, even 10. It always evolves. It always gets better, it always gets more precise. But treating people, all people, through the same lens of the so-called norm, because of the average type of people, let's say, doesn't help the one side of the spectrum or the other, and the, let's say, lower and the higher spectrums of the average. What I mean by that? I'm glad you asked. I mean, there are so many ways people perceive and experience this so-called reality and the world and themselves. And who is to say really when you think about it? That today's norms are based on some universal truth or something. Because today we know that some norms from 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, 200 years ago, were not even not halfway there, but totally wrong. And who is to say that today's norms won't be looked at in 50 or 100 or 200 years the same way? But we give ourselves the right to execute a certain, how should I say, judgment about certain people, and we have lawfully sanctioned ways of treating the sick. That's a little I mean, those 50 and 100 and 200 years ago thought the same. They were just trying to help. Electroshocks and such. Good idea. We're trying to do some good. As we are today. With best of intentions. And who said it? Way to hell is paved with good intentions. Right? I gotta throw a disclaimer at you. I'm no medical professional. I don't want to encourage you to see things a certain way. I'm just trying to look at some things from some different perspectives. judge for yourself or research for yourself further than all of that. Don't take any of my advices. I try not to make them. If I do, don't try to take them as if I know something. You know? I'm not a medical professional. For better or worse. Or better. Okay, let's move on. I'm interested in psychology now. I saw so many of those videos and interviews and read books and all of that. And I always felt like, yes, it makes sense, but something is missing. Some nuances seem to be not mentioned, so not to distort the message that works in maybe 80% of the way. You come far. You have come far. Depends on what you look at the birth of psychology. We came far with it in a relatively short period of time. And also, if you look at the history of psychology, you can see how the zeitgeist of the culture from those psychologists always at least slightly influence how they see certain things, right? How they approach certain things, how they value certain things. So that's also something to have in mind always, right? And I do agree with many of it. Let's say 80 to even 90%. What I just am trying to add is a little nuance and maybe some edge from whatever side you look at it, because these edges are key to certain insights. Dancing on those edges open up doors to newer, maybe more profounder insights. And also, and I come to that at the end, it's based on, even the modern psychology is still based on certain old materialistic, reductionistic principles in a way. There are many good psychologists, many, that talk about important issues and where people fall prey to the dark tetratypes and all of that. And it's important work, and it's good work with good insights and all of that. But sometimes other things seem like the ones they describe that are not that. Pathology, the concept of pathology is understandable and important and prevents more harm than good. I said more, but it also prevents some good or pathologizes some good, even if it's only 10%. How do I mean that? Consciousness, soul maturity, types and levels within types are not or don't seem to be incorporated in the whole thinking process and evaluating and re-evaluating process of psychology. I don't see it. They want a unified metrics for all people, and this just doesn't work. You can't, and I'm trying to be diplomatic, and excuse me if I won't succeed. I don't mean disrespect or something, it's just, you know this, you feel this. You just see which people are more advanced, let's say, in be it intellectually or emotionally or morally or whatever. You just see it, you just feel it, with which you vibe and with which one you don't, you know. And that's a key that psychology also doesn't take into account. People do. You can take 3 different people who do the same thing, but out of 3 different mindsets, emotional states, levels of consciousness and insight and perspectives and motives and all of that. But psychology seems often just evaluates the point done, or prescribes it to a certain type, as if that action can only be motivated through, or has the goal to, or has a perception from. You know, I rarely see nuances there. And for some people, because they're right in, let's say, 90% of cases, I wanna emphasize the 10% who are misdiagnosed or treated for something that is actually treated, that is actually good and beautiful and whatnot. It shouldn't be treated. That are at some heart level, spiritual level, that if all the world would be like them, there would be no wars, there would be no all the bad stuff. So why don't we take that as the norm? You can pause here and think about it for a week. Okay. Well, of course, there are, sadly, many of those dark tetratypes that mimic them, or what they say, or even what they do sometimes, to seem as. And people fall for it if they're good actors, and most of them are. And they have that wrong picture of that person, of course, and they have a beautiful picture of them, and they want to keep it. And that's why they excuse them more than they would other people, and all of that stuff, and neglect some signs and red flags and all of that. But that's what this does to say psychologically that all that mimic those qualities are bad. They also pathologize the 10% that are genuine in this. So instead of us trying to be the genuine ones like them at that level, pathologize it and lower our chances and say that lower average should be the norm. And what world do we have today because of that? Just saying. What world do we have from that? There you can also pause and reflect for a week. So, I mean, what do we want to achieve? What is psychology for? Momentarily, it seems to me that it's even encouraging the egocentric view of the people. But that's not your problem. But that's not yours to fix. But there's not. Just look at yourself. Just concentrate on yourself. Just get yourself in order. That trap. So you can help the world. And it is, of course, there is truth in that. But what it often does is making people egocentric and narcissistic and selfish and hedonistic, and if they're feeling good, they are in their closest social circle, then they lose interest of anyone else. You hear that so often. As long as me and my family and my friends are good, I'm good. and that's it. So, if I'm working at a job which pollutes waters, rivers, seas, air, soil, whatever, that affects the rest of the planet, that's not my problem. Modern psychology basically indirectly, or unwillingly, or however, doesn't include that. It just focuses on this person. They are not trained for seeing the issue on a worldly scale, on all the interconnectedness of all the second and third and fourth and fifth order effects, of all the ripple effects through society, through certain things. It atomizes people. Sure, there are levels of atomization on a personal level, but then the next level seems to be this. Yes, they have more self-esteem and go more out in the world and all of that good stuff, and so the system seems good. But it stops there. Actually, sometimes making matters for the whole humanity worse, because then they're in the mindset of, well, I'm healed, everything I do is good and right and I'm happy and all of it, all is good. That makes them even harder to break out of the bubble of hurting the rest of the world. They're still buying clothes that are made in some inhumane conditions by children in Bangladesh or somewhere. Contributing to but make them feel righteous. Those bubbles. We have to at least extend over this whole little blue dot planet. Core questions of morals and ethics, right? Have to be a part of psychology. So it has to also be deeply epistemological, philosophical, but also spiritual. Also that insight of acknowledgement in the first place, officially, that there are just people who are more or less advanced in certain areas, spirituality being one of them, if not the most important one. Take love. The most misunderstood subject ever. Because it can mean so many things to so many people. So many levels. Ancient Greeks had, I believe, 9 different types. Right? And agape is, I think, also most important because it kind of integrates all the others also up to a point, or permeates all of them in some fashion. I mean, just simply having that as a baseline of human interaction, and that from the ego disillusioned perspective, whoever did have such an experience knows what I'm talking about. That felt unity of all living creatures, be it through teacher plants or NDEs or whatever. It touches something else. No one gets unchanged from that. Also in different levels and understandings, filtered through their own capacities and capabilities of incorporations and all of that. But rarely in a bad way. It's kind of a rite of passage. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it, right? I'll give you a few examples. Most modern psychologists' vocabulary is built inside a materialist, ego-centered frame. So of course the terms point in a certain direction, toward pathology, equilibrium, boundary management, self-protection, and skepticism of anything that exceeds the norm. If you flip almost any of these terms, the following ones, you get a meaning that is equally valid and often closer to the truth for awakened individuals. Example 1. Codependency, flipped. The modern framing is you give too much and lose yourself, and that's pathologized. Flipped, you have a capacity for profound connection that others haven't developed, and that's potential spiritual strength misread as weakness. For many awakened people, what's called codependency is actually devotional intelligence or soul level attunement. But the world doesn't know what to do with that, so it calls it sick. Example number 2. Enmeshment flipped. The modern framing is too close equals unhealthy. Flipped, ego boundaries dissolve in genuine love. The therapist panics because it resembles loss of individuality. But in awakened states, it's union without loss. Example number 3. Love bombing flipped. The modern framing, intense early love equals manipulation. Flipped, unfiltered purity or recognition, mistaken for pathology by those who cannot differentiate light from seduction. Modern psychology often cannot tell the difference between magnetic presence and predatory charm. It sees intensity and assumes danger. Which, again, it might be true in 90% of the time, or 95%, but not always. Example number 4. Trauma bond flipped. Modern framing, strong pull towards someone equals unhealed trauma. Flipped, soul recognition filtered through an ego that can't interpret it. Psychology only sees the ego turbulence, not the deeper soul magnetics. Example number 5. Idealization flipped. Modern framing, you project perfection onto someone, which equals delusion, right? Flipped, you're perceiving their highest self, but the therapists call it fantasy because they only acknowledge the personality layer, the mask. In awakened states, it is actually normal to see someone's potential self first, or their best possible self. It is hard, it is really not easy to differentiate wishful thinking and those through empathy implied values of the other that can only come through time and experience with that person. If you give them that, but also if you see a certain pattern, right, that is not so good, the red flags type, but even that, I won't say risk it, God forbid. It's really not that easy, right? Even those can be false alarms or projections out of one's own fear, right? Because they expect it, because they're afraid of it. So they can't even see it when it's not there. It's why it's so tricky and can't be simplified, Anyway. Example number 6, emotional dependency, flipped. Modern framing, needing someone emotionally equals unhealthy. Flipped, humans are relational beings. Deep openness is pathology because it threatens the myth of the independent atomized self. Waiting love is interdependent, not isolated. It is all present, omnipresent. If you're in that state, to recognize that we are from the same unity, from the same consciousness. We are not that different, just expressions of different perspectives and such. On some of those levels, it is always interdependent. But it's also utterly independent. That agape type love is the recognition of the sovereignty of the other. That is not selfish, that is not possessive, that is not jealous. How does that saying go? If you love something, let it go. It'll come back to you if it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. Love is not selfish. True love, that kind of universal love, is not selfish. It's not jealous. Some of us can love someone deeply and let them go if their happiness is your happiness. There is no such thing as but what about me? If their life's way is taking them wherever, and you know they're clear about their decision and they will be a happier person there, it's something that you wish for them. You're not gonna try to stop them because you won't follow. That's something else, right? It hurts only when the ego is involved. I wanted that person by my side. At the expense of their happiness. That's what you call love. You know, you see, but many people, if not most people, never even reach that stage. So of course they can't understand it and they pathologize it. Or they misinterpret it, at least. As if you don't care or something. It's exactly the opposite, right? And they interpret selfishness and possession as care and jealousy and all of that. what good can ever come out of that level of understanding, of feeling, of selfishness? But psychology promotes exactly that. It doesn't tell anyone who grieves about someone they loved, moved to another country, and now they're sad for themselves, not happy for the other. It's okay. You have a right to feel sad about it. Of course, if you're at that level, you have the right to feel sad about it. But that just reinforces it, like, in a way that, you know what I mean? It's hard to even put in words. They kind of have the taboo of saying, look, do you love this person? Is that person happy there? Aren't you happy for them? I believe their codex even forbids them to say something like that to a patient. And most people are oblivious to it. So they take it as it is confirmation that I feel right. And that feels good. And therefore it must be right. And that's the highest of what? Selfishness? Sorry. I just, you know, we are more complex than that. Or at least some of us are. I'll make a few more examples. Example number 7, reciprocity imbalance. Flipped. Modern framing, you give too much. It's unhealthy. Flipped, others cannot metabolize the level of love / awareness you naturally embody. Your abundance is interpreted as dysfunction because the system is built around scarcity. Or some economic exchange or something. It's like, if you love me at that level, I'm only allowed to love you at the same level, otherwise I'll be pathologized. If someone has more insight, has more awareness, has more love, or a higher form of, broader form of, you can still love this person at this level, that's okay. That's what we do with our children, even if they're not there yet, right? It's kind of, and that doesn't necessarily, or barely, because it has to do with physical age, but soul maturity, right? You know those people. You all know those people. If you talk to them, you might be 50 and they might be 20 and they sound like 80. And other way around, the people that are 70 or so sometimes it sounds like you're listening to a 14-year-old. You know, we have to start to see that and acknowledge that and filter such simplified how should I say it diplomatically again? Statements, right? More nuanced. Should start to make those nuances and always interpret things through all that different factors, right? Example number 8. Avoidant attachment. Flipped. Modern framing, you're distant because you fear intimacy. It's the simplification, right? Flipped, you refuse shallow or ego-based intimacy. And therapists misinterpret sovereignty as fear. Many spiritually mature individuals are labeled avoidant when in truth they're simply not interested in low-level emotional or carnal exchanges. That's also a whole another story, but you see, you can, and it's just the opposite, right? Extreme, let's say. But that also has endless nuances in between. I'm not saying it's black or white. Never. Barely ever. I try not. It's always nuanced. Example number 9. Boundary issues. Flipped. The modern framing is you're too open or too closed. Just that is here is acceptable, and it gets ever smaller what's acceptable. Flipped, they don't understand your energetic integrity. Your natural flow looks like a problem because the diagnostic categories have no language for subtle energy. Or it doesn't have any language at all for soul maturity stuff. There's not only emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, all of that. It's also maturity of interpretations of certain knowledge and dealing with certain levels of insights and all of that. There has to be at least that third factor to make it 3D, if not 4 or 5D. All of that, even simple biology and chemistry, is a part of why we feel how we feel, how we interpret certain stuff, how we, it's a piece of the pie of the whole. Other things may be childhood experiences, other things may be intelligence, other things may be spiritual maturity and such. Regarding not only of the proportions but also the depth of each of those and how much reflection the individual had in all that single fields, let's say, is important to consider. I mean, how come I don't hear anyone talking about this? only barely or only as a side note or something. That's, I think, at least core issue. So the deeper point I'm trying to make, if you flip the entire diagnostic framework on its head, the flipped version often looks more accurate for awakened individuals than the original, because the original terms assume ego as the normal reference point, pathologize intensity, devotion, clarity, and depth, confuse relational spirituality with pathology, misread high frequency love as manipulation, treat sovereignty as avoidance, treat unity as threat, treat unconditional love as delusion. I mean, sometimes, for some cases, some things can seem upside down. And we can't generalize again. Certain symptoms have different causes. Certain actions have different depths and more motives, and what hurts the one may not hurt the other, and the other way around, depending on where someone is coming from with what, and where they are on their own individual path in every one of those cake slices, right? Just keep that in mind. I'm not saying, and I'll say it again, 80 to 90, sometimes in some fashions of some chosen vocabulary and types of interpretations can vary between 80 and 95%, let's say. The psychologists are right. But just maybe keep some other factors also on the table, on the map, that could also be a whole different story than the usual ones that are interpreted always the same way. There are always exceptions to the rule, but there are also exceptions to the exceptions. Let's start there. What do you think? I hope that helps. That's all from me today. Love you, brothers and sisters.